Hi, Logan. How are you?
I am doing well. Doing well. Excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying yes to be interviewed. My name is Nicolette. I am the creator for the podcast titled You're Worthless. Read that again. The juxtaposition of your very soul. Thank you for sparing um, an hour of your time today with me and to talk about your life story. So, my podcast talks a lot about self worthiness. And when I read your profile, I think, yes, I have to get you on the show. So, if you allow me, I'd like to read a bit of introduction for our
Sure.
listeners, and then we can get right into our conversation. So, hello everyone. We have Logan Hufford here with us. Logan is a born and raised Alaskan, married to his gorgeous bride Carrie, who herself is a fourth generation Alaskan, and together they're raising four amazing but crazy little monkeys. Their life is a simple one. They love their family time, their dogs, and exploring the beautiful Alaskan wilderness. And yet, absolutely none of this should be possible today. For years, Logan did just about everything in his power to destroy his marriage and his life. Logan was a raging sex addict. Porn, affairs, hiring prostitutes, and more had simply become a way of life for Logan. He thought he had no hope. In 2016, God began to change all that. Through recovery, God transformed Logan's life and his marriage. Logan and his wife Carrie each now lead recovery groups, doing what they can to give back by sharing the gifts that God has given them. Since January of 2021, Logan has been blessed to be able to use many of the tools he has learned in addiction recovery as a Dave Ramsey endorsed personal finance coach. He's honored to help folks find freedom and healthy living in a different venue than just specifically recovery. Wow, welcome, Logan. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. Just thank you for being willing to dive in.
Thank you. So before we get into the details, so can you share with us what was it like growing up as Logan Huffer?
Growing up as Logan Hufford, that's a little different spin on it.
Okay.
Baby of five. So I've got two older brothers, two older sisters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Close with all my siblings to this day. Had a really, really blessed childhood, a very safe childhood. I always felt loved. I always felt safe. Those are really powerful statements, and yet I totally took them for granted as a kid. But looking back on it, those are accurate statements. I didn't have a perfect upbringing, but I had an incredible infrastructure. Grew up in Alaska, born and raised, living on a mountain. So I mean, like we were a few minutes outside of Anchorage, so we were a few minutes outside of a normal city with a few 100,000 people. But growing up, I mean, we would have moose come in our yard all the time, which, I mean, you and I are like almost as far apart as we can get on the globe. So if any of your
Yeah.
listeners are not familiar with like how big a moose is, it is not like a white-tailed deer. This is like moose are gigantic creatures. But they would just like walk by our window. Occasionally we'd see black bear, I'd see lynx.
Ling.
So yeah, growing up in this incredible infrastructure of a family, incredible wilderness, even though again, like we were 10 minutes away from a gas station, but still like we were surrounded by 10 minutes of forest. It was a really good upbringing, even though, yeah, I took it all for granted as a kid. It was like, couldn't wait to get out of Alaska, go explore, go find another city, go find my own life. I
Mm-hmm.
want to go do me.
Yeah. Well, okay. Just quickly now, this is my question. So is
Yeah.
Alaska always snowing all year round? Because that's how they portray it
Right,
in
right.
the TV.
No, I mean not in Anchorage, not where I was gonna say anybody, not where almost anyone lives. I mean, if you go to the very top of Alaska, like on a map, I mean, like
Right.
the North Pole is not like the South Pole, right? There's no continent that is the North Pole, but
Right.
the northern tip of Alaska is that part of the North Pole, right? Like that is part of the top of the world.
Yeah.
So there are areas there where, yeah, there's always going to be snow.
Uh-huh.
But where 99.9% of Alaskans live, which is most of that, like probably 95% of Alaskans live in South Central,
Right.
Anchorage and surrounding towns and stuff like that. And so, we have normal seasons. Like right now, it's 75 degrees outside. It's
What's
sunny.
that in Celsius? That's Fahrenheit,
Oh
right?
my gosh, I need to learn this because I was
Yeah,
on
because
I was on the
I'm in
call with somebody from
Malaysia,
the
so
UK, and she was like
yes,
Celsius, and I'm like, oh
yeah,
shoot, I don't
exactly.
know. Because I look it
75
up.
Fahrenheit. So because right now I'm in Malaysia and it's
Right,
tropical all year round. Like right now
right.
you can see the sun like
Well, so I'll put it this way. You go to Hawaii. I mean, like,
uh-huh.
if we can just kind of picture Hawaii as, we can all probably imagine that, right? So
Right.
Hawaii on a, not a hot day, but on a cool but like still nice sunny day,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's our summer.
That's your
So it's,
summer.
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So
Okay.
it's never going to be like unbearably hot. Well,
Uh-huh.
except it is to Alaskans because we're not used to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like no homes have air conditioning here. A lot of
No,
cars don't
zero.
have air conditioning here. So, if
Wow.
it gets
Okay.
that warm, people start sweating and they're like, looking for relief. You got all the fans going and all the, trying to get some breeze going through the house.
Right.
But I mean, it's on one hand, like, yeah, there's just like any area, there's like, I'm sure, I think of Australia and I just imagine that there's going to be crocodiles walking down the street. I picture Africa and there's lions, and I picture, all these different places. And yet at the same time, like, there's truth to those things, right? Like, because you could, you could go to the grocery store and you can't get out of your car yet because there's a bear next to you. Like that does happen.
That's a normal day
It's
for
not
you?
like that would not be normal, but that absolutely happens to people
Happens.
sometimes.
Okay, wait,
Um,
I have to wait in the car because there's a bear right outside of my
right.
yeah. Okay.
Like, again,
Oh, that's so funny.
that has never happened to me. That has happened to people I know. I
Okay.
had a friend growing up. A bear climbed through their kitchen window and stole food out of their pantry. A bear.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
The white one?
No, so polar
The
bears don't live
brown one?
down here, but they do live in
Oh
Alaska.
my god.
Polar bears
Okay.
do live in the if you sliced Alaska in half, they live in the top half.
Right.
No, this was a black bear. So these were the smaller bears, but I mean, these are still there's still, a few hundred pounds of predator.
Okay. It can
Yeah.
kill, right? It can kill a
Yeah.
human.
Oh
Okay.
yeah,
No,
absolutely.
we do not want that. All right.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for sharing your background, Logan. That's me being the little kid that I am. I've never been
Yeah,
to Alaska. So, yeah, it's thank you to technology. This is possible right now.
absolutely.
So, Logan, now let's get into the conversation. Now, can an addict really change?
Yes.
How so?
Uh, I'll be honest, like, I wasn't expecting that as the leading question. Like, dang, you're just diving right in.
Oh
Mm,
yeah, my
No, I'm not mad
I,
at it.
yeah, I
We're
like
going
to
from
bring it
bears in Alaska to can an
yeah,
addict change?
and then suddenly addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that a lot. Like people like you, Nicolette, what your podcast name itself is so intriguing, and then you don't give a heck.
That was the first thing I noticed. Like, that's a heck of a title. I like it. I want to know more about it.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, so the short answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, we could spend an hour plus just on the verbiage of, like, the labeling of an addict.
Hmm.
What it means to say I am an addict, what it means to say I'm in recovery, what it means to say I am a recovered person, or I've been healed. Like, all these different words, because on one hand, words matter very much. What I
Yeah.
tell myself matters a lot. What I tell other people about myself matters a lot. What I say in my head matters a lot. So words and labels are very important. But at the same time, there are times where I can, just like anything, where I can make too much out of a label. Like, that's why, my handle on Instagram, at no longer in bondage. My
Mm-hmm.
tagline when I go on podcasts is Logan Hufford, no longer in bondage. That's not like a cute little thing that I thought sounded cool. Like, literally, for 7.5 years, I would say I'm Logan, I'm a recovering sex addict. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that label. But I started feeling this, like, strong conviction, like, let's look at that a little bit. Not that I'm not, I mean, I'm always going to be in recovery, in the sense that, like, I'm always going to be working on continual healing, continual getting healthier.
Hmm.
But a more accurate, in my opinion, or at least in my experience, a more accurate label was to say, I'm Logan Hufford and I'm no longer in bondage,
Hmm.
because it completely identifies what the addiction was, what the monster was, sexual addiction.
Hmm.
So ownership over my addiction, check. Ownership over my choices, check. it also clearly identifies that there's a past tense there.
Yeah.
That I was in bondage. I was in chains. I was trapped. I was trapped by my own choices. I don't hide from that. My addiction didn't put me in a cave. I put myself in a cave. But it's like, so it identifies what the monster is. It identifies the fact that I'm no longer in bondage to that monster. And then maybe it's not, this is a little bit more implied. It's not stated necessarily, but in that phrase, it also, it in my opinion, it also shows that, yeah, I guess I said a lot of ums and
That's okay. Well,
so
I'll edit it out. It's
the other thing that is part of that phrase, and this is why I push back on terms like healed, recovered. I definitely don't ever say fixed or things like that, because I absolutely could go back to my addiction if I chose to.
Yeah.
I think about it like it's this monster that, I created and I fed and I encouraged and all these different things. And that monster, over the last 8+ years, I've been starving it. I've locked it away. I don't feed it. I don't look at it. I don't, I do whatever as much as I can. I don't think about it. Like, it's just, that thing is gone. It's not part of my life. But if I were to go feed it, if I were to go let it out of the cage, if I were to go, have activity with it again, like, yeah, of course I could go back to it. But the difference is now I'm in full cognitive control of my choices. Whereas for some years, even though I was responsible for my choices, and I always emphasize that, there's some measure of cognitive control that is given over when somebody is living in an addiction. And it's a really tricky balance. It is my fault that I made my choices. At the same time, there's not just an off button I can push. You didn't ask for all that, and I'm sorry for rambling.
No, it's okay.
Can an addict really change? Short answer is yes, and I just try to do my best to kind of unpack
my
how.
podcast is I tend to go very deep on some of the questions. So yeah, thank you. And I want to circle back on the fact that you said the word, the verbiage, right? Like you said, you were a recovering addict, and then that's the same thing when I name my podcast, because I used to tell myself you're worthless until I looked at it again, read it again. That's exactly the opposite of your soul. You are not worthless, and I mean, why are you here, right? So I appreciate you going to that extent and explaining that. Okay, if an addiction is defined as something I can't quit on my own, then doesn't that mean I'm not taking responsibility for my choices?
So again, I mean, this is, I'm not just saying this as a cop out. Like, this is another one of those where we could do a whole series
An
of
episode,
episodes,
yeah, yeah.
on
Yeah, you know
that.
what? You should consider having your own podcast. I think that'd be really good.
I don't want to. I'm not going to bore your listeners with like all my inner thoughts, but it's definitely something I have considered strongly. This is me
I think you
guesting on
should.
other people's podcasts is my way of, because I can be a perfectionist. And so instead of like, let me wait till I have all the right equipment, let me wait till I know all the software and this, that, and the other, and I have the time, it's like, let me just jump in the pool and get
Yes.
used. And then, even like Instagram, I wasn't doing Instagram before I started doing podcasts, and now I've been hitting that thing hard, just putting out content and
Right.
connecting with folks looking for hope in this area. Where was I?
If an addiction is defined as something I cannot quit on my own, then doesn't that mean I'm not taking responsibility for my actions?
So yeah, of course, I started to go into this accidentally with you didn't send me the list of questions. I wasn't trying to like, start to answer the second one. So if your audience is like, hey, he's already answered that. Well, he's already started
That's
to.
okay.
She's setting him
We're
up.
gonna. I will take my listeners to. I don't want to say merry-go-round, but I think they know my style.
Right. Well, so yeah, as I started to kind of go into, I mean, it's this really tricky balance. I use the metaphor of a cave. I mean, of course, there's a couple different metaphors. I use the monster, right? The cave is another metaphor I use. I went into it a little bit more on one of my Instagram videos, kind of talking about it, which is my addiction was like this cave, this deep, dark, evil cave that I got myself into. Every step that I took going into that cave, I took those steps. I wasn't possessed. I wasn't pushed into that cave. My addiction didn't make me go into the cave. I took those steps. So I own that. At the same time, I got myself into that cave. And at some point, not that there was a singular moment, there was no day or there was no like specific age, like suddenly at age 21, but at some point, I was so deep in that cave that I was going, I don't know how to get out of this cave. I don't know if I can get out of this cave. Truly, this is not a cop out. I didn't know how to operate any other way. Porn was like a maintenance drug for me. It was never the thing that I was like chasing after. It was just, what I would do to get by. Flirting with every woman that was in my path. That was just how I operated. I was a predator. I chased after whatever I could get from any woman or any situation, whether it be pornography, flirting, sexual contact with a woman, getting some attention, even if they didn't necessarily want to flirt with me or give me physical contact, like I could get a little bit of attention, like whatever I could take, I would take. Whatever high I could get, I could get. And so that was my MO. And so I had literally years of muscle memory baked into how I operated. So it's this tricky, and I'm sure, other people could go into the science more. Like I've learned a lot about the science of it. Not a scientist, don't have the lab studies, memorized. But I mean, it's literally, and I didn't realize this in my addiction, of course, but when I'm an addict, and this is true of other addictions, this is true of if I compulsively bite my nails, what I'm about to say is true. I literally rewire my brain to operate in that way. My neural pathways are getting rewired. It's like I'm paving new roads, and the more I go on them, the more they're paved and smooth. So the more smooth they are, the more I'm going to go on them, and it's this cycle, and it feeds itself. But again, at the same time, like I chose to do it. I'm sorry, this is like metaphor day. This really speaks to what the question, though, maybe in the best way. Because this is addiction, this is recovery. So in my addiction, it was like I was in a self-driving car that I couldn't control anything. I was stuck, with the seatbelt fastened, and I couldn't steer, and I couldn't brake, and I couldn't get out, and I couldn't do anything. I was just like stuck in this car going 100 miles an hour. That's what it felt like. It felt like I was automatically just going all these places and doing all these things. Of course, that's not reality, but that's what it felt like. And then through recovery, God used a lot of men and the program that I was in to help me to see, and basically, like it's like now I'm watching the video footage of me in that car, and here's what I see. So number one, Logan was driving, even though it felt like I wasn't. Number two, there were all these off ramps I could have taken, and I didn't see them in my addiction. I didn't see all these opportunities like, hey, maybe I've crossed over 2 or 3 boundaries, or I didn't have boundaries back then, but barriers of like appropriate behavior. But that doesn't mean I still could have stopped. I still could have pulled back. But in my addiction, I felt like, well, I've already gone this far. I guess I just have to keep going. It's like, I already flirted with that girl. Now she's asking to hang out. I guess I just have to. Whereas like, no, of course I don't have to. I'm already in the car with this person. I guess I have to fill in the blank. Well, no, but I'd already crossed over all these. It's like I got to this point where I've crossed over 10 thresholds of any sort of appropriate human behavior. And I got myself to this point where I'm just acting as this monster. And yet it felt like I'm just automatically going through these emotions.
Wow. And for you to be here, to be telling that story again, thank you for being so open and candid and vulnerable. I really appreciate it. I think when I was reading the questions that I was preparing and also cross-referencing it to the ones you have in podmatch, I guess this is also my curiosity. Now,
Yeah.
What about your wife? Were you married then when you were
Yeah.
in this behavior? Yeah.
Basically, all of my behavior that would be obviously inappropriate, and I can unpack what I mean by that. All of my behavior that was externally visible as like addictive behavior or wildly inappropriate behavior, the prostitutes, the cheating, that was all since I met my wife. Some of that was before we got married, but I mean, that was from the time that we were engaged past our wedding day, several years past our wedding day, up until a little bit more than 8 years ago. I was planting seeds before I ever met my wife. To give you a little bit of a timeline, so I'm 33, I'll be 34 here in a couple months. My wife's basically the same age. I started looking at porn as a kid. I don't know the exact age, but call it 9, pre-puberty, before I knew what sex was or anything like that. So started looking at porn then. That basically was like this kind of slow ascent into like finding more porn and looking for more porn. But I was really sheltered upbringing, late 90s, no smartphones, right? And we weren't going to have like Playboys and stuff in the house. So I didn't have access to a lot, but when I could, I would find stuff. So that was like this, wouldn't have looked like much for several years. And I was always very shy around girls my age. I always felt like I was ugly. I always felt like girls wouldn't like me. And so I was not a shy person, but I was shy around girls my age. So first 18 years of my life, I was like Mr. Goody Two-Shoes as far as anyone could tell. Starting to objectify in my brain for sure. Of course, especially with pornography, but starting to learn how to do that with humans in front of me. And then what really, really set it off, again, not blaming my circumstances, but shortly after I met my wife, I started working at a car dealership. I was selling cars. I sold cars for 6 years at the same dealership, and I was really good at my job. This was age 20. Yeah, I started just a few days after my birthday. So from age 20 for the next 6 years, I was good at my job, and it wasn't because I knew all the stuff about cars. It wasn't because I was the slickest salesman. It was because I was really good at getting people to trust me. It was because I was good at building rapport. I was good at connecting with folks and getting them to open up to me. That led to a lot of sales, and that led to a lot of me abusing the vulnerability and the trust and the connection of basically every woman that I came into contact with. I quickly learned that I could abuse that and get what I wanted. And again, it would look different ways. Sometimes it would be a full sexual affair. Most times it would be, sexual texting or just a, flirtatious comment here. But again, I would take whatever I could get, and I would go as far as I could and then move on to the next person, the next situation. That continued for years. We started having kids young too. We had our first son. We have 4 boys and born in 5 years. And our first one was born 11 months after we got married. So most of my addiction, most of my acting out with other women, porn, all this is as a husband, as a dad, as someone who called themselves a Christian, just doing the worst stuff, a husband could be doing. I wasn't joking when I said I did everything I could to throw away my marriage. I mean, every day, this is not an exaggeration, every single day, I thank God for salvation. I thank him for recovery. Because without recovery, I'm thankful for my wife. I'm thankful for my kids. I'm thankful for all these. Without recovery, I wouldn't have any of it. So I thank God for recovery first before I even thank God for my wife and kids. Not that, order of words in a prayer is necessarily what matters, but it's like recovery is what is what has made this even possible. And as we can get into, recovery itself was not possible until God just started to unfold this path in front of me. Because you said you called yourself worthless. I called myself hopeless. I hated that I was alive. I hated that I was alive on this earth because all I do is hurt every single person around me. God, why did you put me here? And that's how I lived for years.
Oh, so whew, this is a tough subject for me as well. So what kind of conversation or that you have with your wife? What was it theme like? Did she know, but she just pretended to not know, or did she confront you? And How can she trust you after all those years?
Yeah. I want you, if I don't remember, please circle me
Yeah,
back to that last part, because I'm
yeah,
going to tackle, I want to try to tackle the first part first.
yeah.
The trust piece is really a separate thing. So, so over the course of several years, it looked like different things, right? Her responses were, of course, different because we're talking
Mhm.
several years. So I confessed to sexual affairs 6 months after we got married. And that was, I mean, I'm thinking on the fly here, but I mean, we're talking about a roughly about a year of cheating on her. Several months before we got married, several months after we got married. I wrote her a letter, and I shared that I had been sexually unfaithful, and I did that. I did legitimately feel terrible. I legitimately, I knew that this was terrible, and I hated that I did it, and I hated myself, and on some level, just out of ignorance, I thought like, okay, well, I'm gonna write. I'm never gonna do it again. Like I would never do that again. This is terrible. Now that I'm confessing it, now that I'm putting it out there in the open, like, well, of course I wouldn't be tempted to do that again. And like I did feel that way for a little while, but of course, did my infrastructure of how I made decisions and who I hung out with and the things that did any of that change? No. But I confessed things to her, and then that started this new terrible habit cycle of confessing to her every so often, these staggered confessions. So number one, these were confessions that I would make primarily because they made me feel better, because it got it off my chest. I got all this crap out of my soul, shared it with her, and now I feel a little bit better. She's meanwhile getting hit with the worst things a husband can tell his wife, right? And she doesn't know how to respond. And again, we've got little kids, right? She's changing diapers. She's, cooking dinner. And she's got her husband coming home every so often telling her about, I'm so sorry I had an affair. I'm so sorry I did it again. So I don't remember like how many it took or how many years it was. But at some point, I just remember going like, because at first when I would confess, I would feel like, okay, I know I said it before, but I'm really never going to do it again. Well, at some point that changed. At some point, I was like, yeah, I'm not ever going to be able to stop. I'm always going to be doing this. I remember literally having the thought, like, I wonder how many more years I'll get to live with my kids. I wonder how many more years I'll get to live with Carrie, my wife. And it was like there was no feeling of control in it. That's not an excuse, but that's where my mind was at. I felt like I was in that self-driving car and crap, I just can't stop doing this. The hopelessness and despair and self-hatred just, filled me up. 2015, the summer of 2015, I had another affair, and that was when Carrie did something she'd never done before. She had always, she's always been an incredible wife. She's always been my best friend. She's always been an incredible woman. She always tried to love me more, to be sexier, to make sure that, she was going to be as available as possible, that I would never have a reason to cheat. Nobody coached her up on that, although now in recovery, we hear that advice all the time, especially from the church. And it's really terrible advice to a woman that's been betrayed, but that's really common advice. So even though she never got that advice, she felt like that. It was never about her. It was about me chasing after the new high, the next high, the new and different and more and all that, just like a drug. So in 2015, she gave me an ultimatum. She said, Logan, I can't control, she didn't say these exact words, but I can't control if you, hurt me, but if you continue on this path, if you don't change, then I will leave and the kids will leave. Because she couldn't fix me, she couldn't stop me, but she could control whether or not she left. And so she shared that with me, and I believed her. Now, that was the summer of 2015. My sobriety date is May 19th, 2016. So there was still almost a year before real traction started of not acting out, getting in a recovery program. I didn't have a sexual affair again, but porn was still a big struggle. And just, my MO of flirting and stuff like that still came and went. It didn't get to the point of, reaching certain levels, but that's, again, my behavior still was still up and down and up and down. But for Beth, that's very weak and vague verbiage, but it's accurate verbiage. That's I was kind of doing the bare minimum, checking the boxes, like, because I still didn't really feel like anything was going to work. I was willing to try it, but I'll stop rambling for right now. But
No, I am really into this, so I appreciate you sharing. I mean, I probably need to have you back on for another episode, so
I'd be
because we
welcome to
have
do
few
that.
more questions. So yeah, yeah. And how can then your wife Carrie trust? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
So this is where, so she's, again, not to like bore your listeners, but um, what I would love to do is have a podcast with Carrie some, and I would love to go on
I
podcasts
would
with Carrie
love to have
because
her on as
her
well.
her story, because some of these things is like, okay, I can share with you, I can tell you from her mouth like what she has said when she shared her testimony and all, but I mean, of course, it only means so much. It's coming from another human. When she shares her story and people can see her journey of healing and her journey through all this, that just is a whole other thing. Because like she has her
Yeah,
story, I have my story. We as a family have our marriage story, and like they're all connected, but they're all
yeah,
unique. The I'll try to give a short-ish answer, which is she learned to trust me because I started to display believable behavior. It wasn't because I gave her more promises or better promises. It wasn't because I started to be more affectionate with her. No, it was because she saw in me eventually, again, not so much those first few months, or I mean, maybe a little seeds planted, but she started to see sobriety, which was part of it. May 19th going forward, but I joined a program. It was a voluntary house arrest program, basically, for 2 years, where I was living in the home, and it wasn't a legal procedure, but it was. I mean, I couldn't go camping. I couldn't. I had to make a phone call every single day. I had to meet with my mentor every single week. I had mandatory meetings on top of that. I had hours of homework every week. It was a very rigorous program. So, she saw my actions are different. My actions are backing up my words. I am not just saying I'll be different, I am being different. Not perfectly, but progressive victory, not perfection, is what we always say in recovery. So believable behavior was a big piece of it. The other piece of it was and this is its own like miracle. She trusted so much and submitted to the program. She not out of naivety, not out of ignorance, but we got to know my mentor, and then his wife mentored her in sexual betrayal trauma, which is its own, all the abuse that I'd done to her, all the betrayal I'd done to her. She needed to heal from that. And so she dove into recovery right after I did for herself. So, we had an incredible mentor, each of us, who were, of course, married to each other, and they had mentors surrounding them. So we had a whole team that worked with us. And so Carrie knew, like, Logan is not just out here trying to be better. He's got a man working with him. He's got men holding him accountable. He's got a whole team of guys that he works with. If he does something, if he crosses a boundary, not just like if he had an affair, but like, if he crossed any boundary, like there's a whole list of things that I would have to report to my mentor, to other men, all these. So she knew, like, I'm accountable for my time. I'm accountable for my behavior. A really good tangible example of what that looked like was right before I graduated from my program. This was March of 2018, right before I graduated. So I'm, a little less than 2 years sober, which at the time felt awesome, right? But looking back on it, I was still kind of a baby in recovery, but there was way more traction than I'd ever had in my life, right? Almost 2 years. We went down to Arizona for a vacation for 1 week, but then she stayed in Arizona for 3 weeks with our boys, and then with her grandma, because her grandma lives down there. And I came back up. I couldn't take enough time off work to be down there for a month. So I came up. So for 3 weeks, I'm living at our house by myself. She's down in Arizona for 3 weeks. 2 years before that, I was sending texts to women and looking at porn. 3 years before that, I was having sexual affairs. And she would tell you, if she was sitting here, she has shared this with ladies and in her testimony. She didn't worry about what I was doing. She didn't struggle with wondering what was going on. Logically, she should have had every worry in the book, right? Like logically, but she knew I had a multiple page safety plan written out that's required anytime the routine is different, whether I'm on a trip or, I'm all alone or I'm, got a family situation that's different. Like what I had to do a safety plan, and I had all these boundaries and all the timelines of my schedule and all these things. I had all the rules laid out that my mentor didn't make for me. I made them, and then he would give me feedback, and other guys would give me feedback and stuff. Carrie knew, how often I was going to be meeting with my mentor and all the different things I was going to be doing. In that 3 weeks was like no 3 weeks I'd ever had before. I mean, didn't look at porn, didn't even feel a temptation. And that's not necessarily going to be every guy's story. There's going to be some, there's been other times where I've had temptations for sure. What I always try to get at there is like, I had so many boundaries and so many rules. Boundaries and rules to somebody that doesn't understand them sounds really intense. It was intense. It sounds oppressive, but it wasn't. It gave me so much freedom because I could just, this sounds cheesy maybe, but like I could just live my life, enjoy time with me and my dog, at the house, enjoy time with, like, I had my mentor over for dinner one night and we just hung out. Had a buddy over for dinner one night, just, cooked him breakfast for dinner and we just hung out and just enjoyed life in a wholesome way, without porn, without, objectifying women, without preying on, without alcohol, with just all these different. So I'm giving these really long answers. It's hard for me to
No, I
not
can
do that.
imagine. Like, I'm picturing it right now. Like it's that's
So
the essence of it. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of like, how could Carrie trust me? That's the two big pieces were, yeah, she trusted and submitted to the program and the men that made up that program, which is a Christ-centered recovery program. But then also, she saw believable behavior in me. Not that I was perfect, but, I was progressively getting healthier.
Wow, I need to get you on for another episode, and I need to get your wife on separately. Is that all right?
So I tell her every so often, I'm like, there's a growing list of people that would love to have you on.
Yeah.
So I mean, I will make sure that you're on that list. She, at this time, she's like, I don't want to do podcasts. And she's,
Okay.
just that, but I, for lots of reasons, it would be incredible for her to be able to share, because there's a lot of women that would benefit hugely, and just people in general. And it's an incredible story.
Yeah, well, do let her know.
Yeah.
Maybe have her on podmatch as well, and then, or not even. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be podmatch since we're connected already. So
Right.
I would love to have her on, and then I would want to have you on for the part where you're now doing personal finance coaching, right? And the recovery part of it, like,
Yeah.
because okay.
Well, what I yeah, so I tell people with that is like, finances are not my passion.
Okay.
They're truly not, which might sound crazy coming from a person that works in the financial industry, but it's like, I want to help people. I want to help people get healthier. And I work as a coach, personal finance coach, but I make it very clear to every person that meets with me, like, you might not want me as your coach because, number one, I don't have a bunch of fancy letters after my name. I don't have diplomas on my wall that are going to impress you. My experience in working with folks, helping them, is in recovery. I don't go into all the nitty gritties of it, but it's addiction recovery, and it's working through human behavior. Because at the end of the day, I mean, whether it's, spending money impulsively on my credit card, struggling with anger, drinking too much, sexual addiction, whatever. I mean, they manifest differently, right? These different destructive habits and tendencies. But the majority of the DNA of what makes that person chase after that thing, in general, the majority of that DNA is the same. In like going into recovery, I mean, I would love to come on and go deep on like what recovery looks like, the tools and the structure.
I'd like that.
Because I don't ever want it to come off like, there was no magic wand. Like, I met this guy and then, suddenly
And
it was
I'd like
fixed.
to know your safety plans that you had just now. Like,
Yeah.
that's a proper steps on how you. I just want to go deep on that. Maybe just one episode, just on recovery itself. Like
Yeah,
right
that would be
now, we're
wonderful.
touching. Yeah, we're touching on the before and then the after, the recovery part of it. So
Yeah.
okay, so yeah, I think we'll take it offline. We'll schedule for another episode,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna pivot this to a self-worth question before I end the interview because my podcast talks about self-worth. Logan, the question for you: how would you define self-worth, and why is it crucial for personal growth and happiness?
I would define self-worth. This is completely on the fly for me.
Yeah,
My
I was
value.
I feel bad putting people on the spotlight like this all
No,
the
you're good.
time.
You're good. You can edit this out. I mean, I enjoy being put on the spot in the sense I enjoy new questions, questions that I was not prepared for, that I have not thought about or have not been asked about. So self-worth, if I sort of tweak that verbiage as where does my value come from? Because I'm a Christian and I absolutely believe my value comes from being a creation of Christ, being created in his image. But that can sound pretty nebulous. Like, what does that mean? Like, what, especially if somebody doesn't have those beliefs, right? So while I believe that to be true, maybe a different way to put it would be my value as a creation of Christ, my value as someone created in God's image, as other people can be, my value as other people can witness it is what is my mission on this earth? How am I loving others? What am I delivering to others? I do believe, I mean, every single human has the capacity to understand a mission, understand why they were created. And it's going to look different for different people, right? I don't have the giftings of lots of other people. But like for me, I mean, I went deep on my self-hatred and despair and literally going, God, why did you create? And now I'm blessed to be able to go, I know why God created me. I very much believe God created me so that I can have this story, so that I can help other men, so that I can, put my hand into that pit and help other men out, just like God put men in my path that did that for me.
That's powerful. Okay. Now, um, last question for you. Normally, this is just also on the fly because
Sure.
this is I never thought this we're gonna we're gonna have another episode. So, I normally end my podcast with the guests having to quote a quote that they create to leave to the audience listening and the world as his or her legacy. What would it be?
Can you say the question one more time? The last part?
If you could create a quote right now for you to leave to the audience listening and the world is your legacy, what would it be?
Woo, that's a big one. I'll probably kick myself because I'll probably think of something better.
That's okay. You
But,
can
but
say it in
the
the
thing,
second. The second.
well, I mean, so I'm not just like grabbing this out of thin air. This is honestly, this is a very, I'll say this is a core principle for me and my recovery. This is a core principle of just what I believe. And when I'm coaching folks, whether it's in recovery, financially, in my job, the Instagram stuff that I do, if you are trapped in a destructive cycle, I promise you there are other folks that have been where you're at and have not just gotten out, but they've experienced transformative healing. Those people do exist. I've been able to meet some people. I mean, I've got a rough past. I've got a rough history of how I treated people. I have met people with a prison record and without a prison record, but people that have done some of the worst things a human could do. And these people, I've gotten to know them very deeply. And I know them well over the course of years. You would not know that these people had done those things. Some people might say the same about me, that, wow, literally, a buddy just said that to me at the gym. He started following me on Instagram, and it was just like, that's cool. Like, I'm not hiding from it. But he's like, dang, like, wouldn't have thought that. It's like, well, yeah, because everyone's got stuff, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has, whether they're dark secrets or not, everyone has stuff that they struggle with.
Mhm.
And like a lot of folks, I didn't realize, hey, there's other people that have been down this path. There's other
Mhm.
people that have experienced healing from this. I thought I was the only one that either done it or definitely nobody else has gotten healing. So I promise you there are other people.
Whoa. Okay. Now, yes, we're gonna have this one. I think probably sometime next week or next month, depending on your time. Another
Sure.
episode. We cannot. I need to keep the momentum going because I think we're leaving our listeners hanging here. But I've never done this, but this is done. There's always first for everything. So I'm gonna close it here for our listeners. And for those that are listening, you have it, guys. There you have it. You heard it from Logan Hufford, person himself. Before we close off, Logan, I'd like to thank you personally for the work that you're doing for the world and for advancing every step of the way, despite the challenges, creating trails for those that will come after you. For our listeners, this has been that one podcast with that controversial name, You're Worthless. Read that again. The juxtaposition of your very soul. If you find yourself thinking that you're worthless, you're probably not alone. But more importantly, ask yourself a level deeper. If I'm worthless, then why the heck am I here? It is because your soul have chosen to be here energetically, all the way from the ethers, and for that reason itself, you are worthy and you are enough. This has been Logan Hufford, your guest of the day, and Nick Nierras, your host, signing off. Thank you so much, Logan, and I see you for our next episode.
Absolutely.